That's where it's at.
Say it one more time. What's the quote that you love?
My favorite quote that I displayed in my office for decades is, "Don't look down on a man unless you're going to help him up." And, if everybody chose to live their life that way, and I don't understand why it's not more popular, right? Helping others, empathy, decency, inclusivity, share the wealth, not just financially. Why? And Pete, I believe there are more of us than them. I believe there are more people who want to help others than want to hold others down or hate on others for who they are, who they love, or where they came from, or what God they worship or don't worship. I absolutely believe there's more of us than them. I think they're just more ambitious and ruthless and cutthroat, and they rise to the top, particularly of the political world. And that's why we have such a damn difficult time governing ourselves responsibly. Drives me crazy because we can do better.
You could argue people that have that mentality that's opposite to what you just described, starting with that quote, also rise to the top of the corporate world, the different industries.
Yeah. The American oligarchy in all things. I mean, those seem to be the people who rise to the top.
Well, I think a lot of the rest of us that you're talking about certainly rise to the top as well in many different ways, in hopefully try to fight that. I mean, if you can't change it, I guess you have to fight it, right?
Yeah. And I think lots of the people who rise to the top of the Democratic Party are good, honorable, inclusive, empathetic people. I don't know if the power and the prestige and the wealth that comes with it changes them. I don't know, because I've never been up there and will never be up there in the political stratosphere. But I just think we can do better governing ourselves. I really do.
Well, it does probably change them, but the people who do good are probably people who focus on a kind of practice, or even like a quote like that one, that remind themselves where they come from as often as they can. Like anybody, I think, is impressive when they have a practice of something that they do that keeps them humble.
Yeah. Humility goes a long way.
I'm not familiar with it. Moving on. I want to ask you about a whole bunch of legal issues, but I always love to hear your thoughts on anything, including philosophy of life, which is, I suppose, what we could call what we were just talking. You've been doing a whole bunch of great work, of course, on YouTube and with your podcast as well. Maybe we work our way backwards. You've just dropped a new video on Mark Meadows right before we talk, so it's the one I haven't seen yet, but give us a preview of what you had to say there and why, how big of a deal. You use a Richter scale now, I guess?
Yeah, legal Richter scale. And I just dropped a 20-minute plus video, which is longer than my daily videos typically are, because, I was on last night with Stephanie Rule and we were talking about the reporting regarding Mark Meadows getting immunity. And so many people are like, he's flipping. It's an immunity deal. It's great. No, it's not. It's not even good, in my opinion.
Oh, no.
It's not necessarily terrible. It depends on where Jack Smith goes with Mark Meadows next. But here's the thing. I'll try to condense it, Pete. When a witness like Mark Meadows, who is also probably a potential defendant, because, you don't burn documents all day in your fireplace to generate warmth. You do it because you're up to no good, right? So when a guy like Mark Meadows, who has damaging, incriminating information about Donald Trump, the prosecutors want to extract that evidence from Mark Meadows, there are basically three ways to go about it. One, you subpoena him, and the subpoena is a court order that you must go into the grand jury and testify. Well, guess what? Mark Meadows has a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, so he can trump, no pun intended, the subpoena. He could say, yeah, I plead the Fifth. Next, well, the next thing you do with a guy like Mark Meadows is, if you have enough evidence to indict him, you indict him, you strike a guilty plea with cooperation deal, you flip him, you reduce his charges, you give him a sentencing cap, but most importantly, you have him take responsibility for his own democracy-busting crimes in concert with Donald Trump, and then you sponsor his testimony so he can testify truthfully and credibly against Donald Trump or others, which he can only do once he takes responsibility for his own crimes. That's the second way you extract evidence out of Mark Meadows. The third way is the least best way. You give him immunity. Pete, you know what immunity is? It's a frickin' pass for the crimes you committed. I'm immunizing you. Just go into the grand jury and talk bad about Donald Trump,
Right.
and you're not going to be held accountable for your crimes. Pete, when you put that kind of a witness on the stand at Donald Trump's trial, the jurors are like, wait a minute, dude didn't have to take responsibility for his crimes. Why are we going to believe what he has to say
Right.
about Donald Trump's crimes? These prosecutors gave the farm away to Mark Meadows. He's going to say anything they want him to say. Now, listen, that is a broad brush, three ways that we extract information. There are different kinds of immunity. So they could have given him very limited use immunity that said, listen, you're being compelled, Mark Meadows, to go into the grand jury, and we're going to ask you 10 questions about Donald Trump's statements and conduct on and around January 6th, and that's it. And that will preserve their ability to charge Mark Meadows in the future, potentially. But just let me end with this. Remember Oliver North, Iran-Contra, committed all kinds of crimes. He was indicted, tried, convicted, and sent to prison. But because Congress had immunized him and he had to testify and incriminate himself in a congressional hearing, his conviction got busted on appeal. It got overturned because the prosecutors couldn't show that none of his immunized testimony didn't circle back and hurt him and was used against him as part of the investigation or the trial. So immunizing somebody comes with a huge potential downside.
So what I'm hearing you say is immunizing somebody does not inoculate their credibility. Their credibility is potentially more in question to the jury. But I also felt like I heard you say he didn't get immunity.
We don't know. What
Right.
we know is ABC News reported he was immunized and he was put in the grand jury to testify about, in a very real sense, against Donald Trump. We don't know the kind of immunity. There's use in transactional. We don't know the extent of the immunity, what it covered. But what I just don't like about the I word when you couple it with Mark Meadows is it is not holding Mark Meadows accountable for his crimes, assuming Jack Smith has enough evidence to indict Mark Meadows. So that's why this was not a lollipops and rainbows story that Mark Meadows got immunity. It doesn't mean he flipped. It's not an immunity deal. It's not an immunity agreement. It's a targeted compulsion order making him testify about certain things, but I didn't take it as hugely good news.
Got it. No, I think that's a really important point, and you're good to point that out. That a lot of people went to jail for this, and the architects may get off. So let's just, I guess, hold our fire on our reactions of joy over it. Everybody should go listen to that whole video that Glenn has just posted. But also, you've got new ones up about the cheese and Jenna Ellis and Sidney Powell, and one of the words that you use so many times was corroboration. And what I want to understand is when they quote flip and they start talking, don't we find out, isn't this when it gets really interesting and entertaining? Because so many theories, suppositions, assumptions, including from people like you who are experts, we need to understand it could be this, it could be that. Now we find out what it actually is in terms of now we'll maybe hear audio, see emails and texts, but a lot of it might just be word of mouth too, I think. So what is the corroboration importance, and when does it really get super interesting? When we find out actual details of conversations, maybe hear them?
Yeah, when you're dealing with a defendant, and there were 19 of them in Fani Willis's RICO case in Georgia, when you're dealing with a Chesbro, a Powell, a Meadows, all and Rudy Giuliani, he's in a category unto himself. What you have to decide is the information, the evidence that they're bringing to the table worth trying to strike a cooperation deal with them and giving them a benefit, reducing their guilty plea, or maybe capping their sentence, or giving them probation, which I'd love to talk about before we're all done. And in assessing what a cooperating witness is telling you, the three most important words are corroboration, corroboration, corroboration. I need to know that if Sidney Powell tells me X, Y, and Z, I can corroborate, support, affirm, prove it with other evidence, emails, text messages, recordings.
To your point about the jury needing credibility on someone who's been, that's why you need corroboration. Don't believe what she's saying now because she's got immunity, which is what I'm sure Trump's lawyers will argue. But look at the corroboration that you're talking about.
Exactly, because if Sidney Powell, tells me she had a conversation with Donald Trump, then I better see either a follow-up email or her contemporaneous note saying, oh man, you're not going to believe what Trump told me to do. Here is the written record that is hard corroboration, not just Sidney Powell running her mouth.
But you're saying Fani Willis and Jack Smith, because these cases are similar. We could probably go back and forth here with some of these people, these defendants, has assured they've got that information. They've got the corroboration that you're talking about is needed, or they wouldn't have given them the deal. We're going to see.
That's my assumption. You're not going to extend what I would call sweetheart deals to Chesbrough, Powell, and
Ellis.
And Ellis, unless you're confident that one, they're bringing truthful information to the table, and two, you can corroborate it. You can prove it with something other than their testimony. Because Pete, so far, all four defendants that they have entered into these guilty plea with cooperation deals with have gotten probation. When I see the democracy busting crimes committed by somebody like Kenneth Chesbrough, the architect of the fake elector scheme, and Sidney, released the Kraken Powell, going into court, filing bogus lawsuits, trying to undermine the results of a presidential election. And these people get probation when the foot soldiers, the J6ers, who were releasing the Kraken at the U.S. Capitol that day, as Trump and Powell told them to do, go to prison. There's something very wrong about all of this. You wonder why people feel like it's a two-tiered justice system. That is not the equal application of the law. Now, mind you, Pete, that's not a criticism of the way Fani Willis is handling her case. I think it's a textbook RICO prosecution.
You had to do that, right?
Yeah, I had to do it. And I didn't have a political angle to the cases that I handled, but the thing that gives me some comfort, the silver lining that lurks behind the probation pleas that have been given out, is the same people who are pleading out in Georgia, Chesbrough, Powell, and Ellis, are also going to be banged out. They're going to be indicted in DC, ultimately, for the crimes they committed in violation of federal law. And that is where I think they're far more likely to get hefty prison sentences.
Well, it seems kind of interesting, just given that there's two separate cases that are on similar crimes, that Jack Smith and the DOJ, or whichever one were to come first, is going to watch the case where they got immunity, and they're going to get all the stuff that Fani Willis got from the immunity deal, and they won't then have to get them immunity. I heard you talk about this, and I thought what I heard is, well, they might get off in Georgia, but they would get prison time potentially from the Department of Justice. And you're talking about these people who have made these deals. All of these, I think, are going to be potentially up for charges with the federal government too.
No doubt. And the fact that the Powells and the Chesbroughs pleaded guilty in Georgia suggests to me that they have already talked with Jack Smith and company, because their guilty pleas in Georgia all but guarantee they're going to get convicted once they are indicted in DC for virtually the same crime. It's a smaller subset of the larger crimes that were committed to try to overturn the election's results in DC. So they must be communicating with Jack Smith and his prosecutors before deciding to do something down in Georgia that will be fatal to them in Washington, D.C. So, yeah, I think all of this is going to come together in the months to come in ways that probably won't be all that surprising.
In this answer to the following question, tell me what the end game here is, because you talk about how Jenna Ellis probably isn't going to be incriminating Donald Trump as much as she is Rudy Giuliani. So it would seem the end game is that Giuliani and Trump are at the very top of the organization of the plan, being influenced by all these people. But Jenna Ellis, in her apology, I got to get your overall reaction to the karma of it all, I suppose. But she said she's a 38-year-old woman who's been practicing law, I assume, for I don't know how long, 15 years, 20 years. She said in her apology, I trusted people who've been doing this longer than me. You interpreted that as being about Rudy Giuliani, and you then listed off in that video, and I did not know this. People should go watch it, but all the things that they made up, that they just made up, which, by the way, destroyed actual people's lives.
Yeah, she admitted that they lied. She pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting Rudy Giuliani's lies to the Georgia state legislature. Right. And she said, listen, my bad. I was the junior lawyer. I should not have believed all the lies Rudy told me and supported him in telling those lies. So basically, she was saying, Rudy, may I introduce you to the undercarriage of the bus?
Right. So that's what that was about. That's what she is doing there in that moment.
And that's why District Attorney Willis has really been brilliant, the way she has gone about sequencing her guilty pleas. Because think about it. The first one was this bail bondsman named Scott Hall. Why was it important to plead him guilty early? Yeah. Because he was joined at the hip with Sidney Powell when they were going down and compromising the Coffee County election equipment, right? So that domino fell right into Sidney Powell, knocked over Sidney Powell. Sidney Powell was in the Oval Office. She's got all kinds of firsthand evidence about what Donald Trump was saying when he was trying to get the military to seize voting machines and make Sidney Powell the special counsel for the Stop the Steal corrupt scheme. So she will be able to crush Donald Trump if she is fully forthcoming as a cooperating witness. And then you have Kenneth Chesebro. Well, that domino is going to fall right into John Eastman, because that's the other guy who was doing the fake elector thing with Kenneth Chesebro. Yeah. And then, Jenna Ellis knocks right into Rudy Giuliani. Now, I would never put Rudy Giuliani on the stand. Mr. Truth is not truth. I would never ask a jury to credit anything Rudy Giuliani said. I don't care if it was corroborated, because, Rudy Giuliani is such an ugly, incredible witness that he just needs to be tried, convicted, imprisoned. So that sends a message to others. Do not try this at home.
You made this really important point that I think I'm not hearing a lot of others make, which is that finally this fake elector scheme is part of the crime, part of the racketeering Georgia case. And you're saying that other states should be going after these same people, I think the same people, for the exact same crime of fake electors. And I think you mentioned the states and I mean, tell me a little bit more about that.
Pete, this is huge. I watched the guilty plea proceeding a couple of times. And when Jenna Ellis said as part of her plea under oath that Rudy and I not only lied to the Georgia legislators about non-existent voter fraud, we lied to the Arizona folks, we lied to the Michigan folks, and we lied to the Pennsylvania folks. You tell me why those other states wouldn't now be working to indict them for the same crime Jenna Ellis just admitted she committed in Georgia and in those other states together with Rudy Giuliani. So I do think there's a chance we're going to see more state indictments in the future.
Well, I mean, you asked me for my opinion, which I'm an expert on such things. And the answer is I have no idea. But it must be a political, why would they do that? I mean, the politics must be at play, Republican or Democrat, who is going to be reelected as whatever the prosecutor, attorney general, or county, whoever's jurisdiction that would be. It's got to be political concern, I suppose, about their own office.
Anytime you let politics intertwine with prosecutorial decisions, it's a recipe for disaster. I never did it in 30 years, but it does feel like it goes on quite a bit.
What do you make? I just got to get your reaction to, obviously, you can talk politics, not only just legal cases here, to Mike Johnson, who is the new Speaker of the House. He is one of all the nominees who voted not to certify the outcome of the election, to decertify the votes, our votes, to say, no, they don't count. I don't like the winner here. Therefore, we're not going to certify the vote, even though there was no evidence of it. He is now the Speaker of the House. And what does that mean about the views of the Republican Party on democracy?
They don't really care for democracy very much. And I listen, Insurrectionists gonna insurrection. And we got lots of them in Congress, and we've got Donald Trump and lots of other folks who are determined to try to kill our democracy in any way they can. And they are what they are. You know, a career bank robber is a career bank robber, and you can't sit around wishing that he would stop robbing banks. You incapacitate the bank robber by holding him accountable under the law. You incapacitate insurrectionists by holding them accountable under the 14th Amendment's disqualification clause. I see this as a failing of our institutions of government because, for whatever reason, the Department of Justice seems to have washed its hands of insurrectionists in Congress who are serving now in violation of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. That's something I'll never understand. But Pete, I'll also never understand why Donald Trump wasn't arrested on January 7th for, you know, extorting and bribing President Zelensky, for 10 counts of obstruction of justice, for avoidable COVID deaths for which he was legally responsible, and of course, for what he incited on January 6th. So I can't explain why our institutions of government refuse to rise to the moment of urgency that we are experiencing. But that is who, at this point, I hold accountable for not addressing the problem of insurrectionists in Congress.
Lastly, want to ask you about gag orders. Weren't you in the courtroom the other day?
Yeah, I was in there for the 2-hour gag order hearing a couple of weeks ago in DC.
So we're talking about, when we say gag orders, we're talking about the case in New York being tried by the AG there, and then obviously the case in DC where Judge Chutkan, who you used to argue with in court.
Yeah, we tried murder cases against one another back in the day. She was a heck of a worthy opponent. She's a fierce, strong, smart, tactically savvy defense attorney back then, and very honorable and trustworthy as an opponent. And she has continued as really an outstanding federal court judge.
All right. Least important question, but when I'm listening to your show, I had to ask. So when you're in that courtroom, there's Judge Chutkan. She remembers you from the courtroom, if not from your numerous appearances on TV. She's watching. She sees you on TV, I'm sure. Do you make eye contact with the judge? Is there any kind of connection there between you and her in the court?
I talk to her in the cafeteria when we see each other. I've spoken with her law clerks about how she and I used to try cases against one another back in the day. So yeah, we remain, on friendly, professional, friendly terms, and which is the case with all of the judges. I mean, there's so many of the judges that I either appeared before or I worked with at the U.S. Attorney's Office. The chief judge, Judge Boasberg, I tried murder cases with, and I supervised him. He's now the one making all these consequential decisions as, in his capacity overseeing the federal grand juries in Washington, D.C. So for me, it's my backyard. It's my stomping ground.
I mean, do you want to ask me what it was like to, say, open for Artie Lang or hang out with Kevin Costner or anything like that?
Artie Lang, too fat to fish, really? Wow.
All right, gag orders. And
Too Fat to Fish was his book title. I'm not making light of any, but that was his book title.
I'm glad you cleared that up.
Too Fat to Fish was his book title.
I'm glad you cleared that up. That's funny. So why were you in court? What do you learn? And you've talked about this, obviously. It's really very important. And there's more news on it today. I think he got questioned in New York by the judge there as well.
Yeah, Judge Ngoran imposed a $10,000 gag order $10,000 sanction because Trump violated the gag order again by referencing his law clerk. He's determined to put that young lady in harm's way. And of course, $10,000, Trump said, hey, somebody run over to Trump Tower, rummage through the couch cushions and give the judge 10 grand. By the way, let me start grifting off my base some more because I'm on my third-rate social media platform right now. I intend to violate the gag order some more because we won't take responsibility for Trump's, dangerous rhetoric and posts. We refuse to do it. But let me go to the DC case. So I sat through the 2-hour gag order hearing. And there are two things that I think are really notable. One, when the defense attorney said, Judge, there is no gag order that you can impose on my client because he's running for president that would pass First Amendment constitutional muster. So the only solution, this is a quote, is if you push this trial date until after the 2024 presidential election, at which point Judge Chutkan became very animated. And she said, and I quote, this trial date will not yield to an election cycle, and we will not revisit the trial date in this case, period. So we're going to start jury selection on March 4th in federal court in Washington, D.C. Here is the downside of what I heard. I heard Judge Chutkan say, any other defendant whose name wasn't Donald Trump, who was on pretrial release in a federal felony case, who said that the prosecutor handling his case is a deranged, not madman, what was the word? A deranged thug, would be revoked on release and would be detained pending trial. That is inarguably true, Pete, but it's also pretty damn disheartening because it's giving voice to the unequal application of the law. And Donald Trump should be revoked on release. He should be detained pending trial because it's an insult to the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people across this country who are being detained pending trial as we speak, and yet they are far less dangerous to the United States of America than is Donald Trump. That's a damn shame.
Well done, as always. I really appreciate it. It's really fun to listen to your podcasts and get all this context and then run through a bunch of them to give people a preview. They should all go listen and subscribe, obviously, and get all of that context because there's a lot more we didn't cover. Glenn Kirschner, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. You look very good as well, by the way. I just want to mention
Thank you, Pete. Love you, brother.
All right, bud.
All right.